Hello, good morning, good evening, and good afternoon, and wherever you are in this wide, wonderful world that we live in, you're very welcome to the Global Sales Leader Podcast. I am your host, Jason Cooper. This series is all about insightful sales leaders, leaders that have something slightly different, a different story, different background. We talk about tech, we talk about leadership, we talk about coaching, talk about psychology, we talk about stuff that goes on in the brain, neuroscience, neurosales, and technology, and how technology integrates with all of this wonderful process that we have. Today, I've got an awesome guest. I would say that. I'm trying to butter him up a little bit. His name is Brian Flanagan. Like, I've known Brian for about 10 months or so, but when I do hear him, he's exceptional. He's very pronounced, very well rehearsed. He definitely knows his stuff from all of what he's done over the past many years, a few years. And if you see, for the video listeners, for the video people, not the audio people, Brian's actually in the Zig Ziglar offices in Texas somewhere. And we know that Tom Ziglar's floating around somewhere in the background, who's also been a wonderful guest. So, Brian, you're very welcome.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. I'm in the intergalactic headquarters of the Zig Ziglar Corporation here in Dallas, Texas.
Wonderful. A little bit of background, which I nabbed from various sources. So Brian began his years at IBM. Great background. I know lots of people have worked in IBM. We have a massive complex here in sunny Ireland. 1984. I was only 14 then, but Brian joined the Zig Ziglar Corporation. What a wonderful mentorship program that you've been on. Like I've never met Zig, but I've heard so many of his audio tapes. Massive global inspiration as a thought leader, and he's definitely up there in one of the global people out there. He's put my hat off to him, and God bless his soul. So you've worked with him for over 25 years. So you've got a whole lot of knowledge from there. And then you branched out onto your own, and you have your own training company. So thank you very much for that. I'm so looking forward to this as normal. So tell me some synopsis, some anchor points along the way. What made you who you are today, and what sort of got you where you are today?
Well, I could cut to the chase on that, Jason. I've been married 51 years, and that's where I am and who I am because of the relationship I've had with my wife over the years. Most encouraging person, my greatest cheerleader. When I was at my worst, she was at her best. So that's what got me here. But along the way on the professional side, I did start with IBM. I started as a delivery boy. When I was in university, I had a job as a part-time delivery boy. That led to a 14-year career with IBM. However, Jason, I was thrown into this sales thing. I didn't have a great desire to be a salesperson, but I found myself in sales, but I was struggling. And when I had my first big promotion with IBM, where I moved from one location into another state, from Louisiana to Texas, I didn't have a lot of confidence in myself. And one of my buddies said, "You ought to go out and buy this book by a man named Zig Ziglar." I thought Zig Ziglar was a sewing machine attachment. I had no idea who this guy was. So I went down and I spent about $13, $12.95 US on a book that Zig had written entitled "See You at the Top." It was his first of 32 books that he had written. I got to page 48 of that book, and that was a turning point in my career. Because at the time, I was a little guy from a little town with a little image of myself. I was struggling. And page 48, one sentence on page 48 of the book said, "You cannot consistently perform in a manner that's inconsistent with the way you see yourself." And that changed my life. Now, my mother told me that for 30 years. My wife had told me that for the 8 years we'd been married. But until I read that book, I was missing success by a distance of 12 inches. And that's the distance from my head to my heart. I worked with salespeople for the last umpteen years. And a lot of times they have the intellectual side, the mindset, but the heart set, they don't feel successful. And what Zig Ziglar said, Brian, let's raise your deserve level. And that was a turning point in my business life as well as my personal life.
Wow. So what are the because you've obviously had that little bit of an anchor point in your life. When you read that book, what was going through your mind just to change the way you think and the way you thought from that point to going, I have to do something here? What was that? Was it just like a, I don't know, was it like a fear of loss or a fear of something that made you want to go forward?
I don't know why I had this image of myself, because I'd raised in a wonderful home. I had very supportive parents. I had brother and sister who loved me. My wife of 8 years, she supported me, helped me get the job at IBM and continue through during the hard times. But there was something that I was lacking, and that lack was, Zig called it a deserve level, and it was a self-confidence issue. And Zig was saying, look, you've got, IBM spent $50,000 on you, training you intellectually to be a salesperson. What you're missing is the people side of this. Yeah. So let me help you with the people side, because IBM had built the professional. Zig was building the person. And as you know, in sales, you need both. You need a strong professional. You need a strong person who has the perseverance, the drive, the ambition. And I was lacking that because I thought I had to perform to get that. And Zig said, look, you were born with all these intangibles. Let's use them. And he brought them out of me. Wow. And what did you do specifically to make you congruent with having these all things, tools and techniques, but without the passion, you're not ever going to succeed? Well, what I learned, and I learned this from Zig's coach. Now, Zig had a coach toward the end of his life. He always had coaches, but toward the end of his life, he had a man named Fred Smith. And Fred Smith was a Christian businessman. That's how Zig met him. And he coached Zig the last several years of Zig's life. And one thing Fred Smith said is, you need to be passionate about what you do. Yeah. And I said, you right. And then he said something, you need to put your talent ahead of your passion. I didn't understand what that meant for probably weeks. What he meant was, don't ratchet your passion down, but you better be skilled enough. You better have the ability to be able to know how to communicate that passion. And I think Zig gave me the processes to do that, the steps and the confidence to do that. So cheeky ask here then, what were the steps? I'm always intrigued because I want to learn and grow, but also the audience here, because we have an expert on here, like Brian, you are an expert at what you do. You've mastered what you've done over the last many years. So for my audience here, what were the steps? Just for me, really, but if people are listening, as people are listening as well. One of the big steps I learned, and I learned this the hard way, is that selling is a process. It's not a personality. So when I was at university, my buddy said, why aren't you in the College of Business? Well, I thought selling was telling. And selling is a process. It's a communication process focused on the other person to solicit their needs and then communicate the solution to those needs. I thought it was just talking about my product. So a couple of very specific things that I learned, Jason. Number one, lead with need. Don't lead with yourself, because now you're selling yourself, and that's part of the solution, but that's not going to solve the guy's problem. I'm going to help him solve the problem with my person, but I need a product or a solution that does that. Mm-hmm. So it's good to sell yourself, but you have to believe in the product when you do that. But primarily what I'm going to do is find out where the issues are and then determine if I'm the person to solve those issues. I have to have a process around that. And one of the biggest things I learned midway through my career, process takes pressure off the person. If you feel conflict or you feel friction with the buyer, let the process absorb the pressure. Don't put the pressure on yourself or the buyer.
Yeah. So what is the best process that you can possibly have?
Well, I've got one in my book entitled "So You're New to Sales." This is my process, and
that's down there, isn't it? I've got it down there on the ticker for all the audio listeners. I've got a ticker down here which says some of Brian's books, and it is on my agenda to read them.
Yeah, the first book, Now Go Sell Somebody Something, was really more of a motivational, attitudinal book. So You're New to Sales is teaching a very simple communication process. Now, my process to this generation, I've had several generations of process. It's a 7-step process, and the acrostic is PROCESS, process. And those are the steps that I use to plan, prepare, prospect. The R stand for relate. You've got to build some type of bond. O is open a dialogue to determine needs. And then the 4th stage to me is the most important, Jason. And I've not spent a lot of time in Europe. I've only been to your home country once in London, but throughout the other part of the world, mainly the Pacific Rim, this doesn't change. When we're selling, no matter where we are in the world, when we're selling, our tendency is to understand the person's needs, then show them a solution. And we skip the middle stage, which is the C stage, confirm the needs in the customer's mind. That, I think, is something we all have a tendency to forget about. We're offering you a glass of water and you don't know you're thirsty.
Mm-hmm.
You've got to slow down the process to make sure that the customer, the buyer, is receptive to our recommendation.
Yeah.
And
totally agree.
That's the biggest mistake, I think, in relationship selling, not in retail sales, not in transactional, but in relationship selling. I think one of the biggest problems is we don't confirm the need before we explain the recommendation. Then the first step, sell the value of your solution, and the last stage is simply ask for the objective. So that's a 7-step process that I've used recently in the last 10 years that has allowed me to have great success.
And do you think the process over the last 30 odd years of you doing what you're doing, even when you started out with IBM and obviously you had an epiphany with working with Zig, which sort of changed the game a little bit for you. What's changed? Has anything changed or is it still the same?
I think a lot changed. You mentioned earlier with all the technology and all the things we're doing to try to connect to people. We can't get them on the phone anymore, which is what we did. In the olden days, we would knock on doors. IBM called it. You go to a building, you start at the top floor, and you canvass the building. You knock, you call, you shake hands. Well, all of that's been put on hold, or it has been put, I guess, barriers between you and the contact. So that's changed a lot. But what hasn't changed, it's still a people business. There's still individuals involved, whether you're meeting them virtually or face-to-face or through correspondence, email, text. You still got to focus on the other person. Yeah. And one of the things, I do 2 things, Jason. I do presentation skills and sales skills. That's where I live. That's kind of my domain. And one of the things we teach in presentation skills, you need skills to take the attention off yourself and focus the attention where it belongs, on the other person or the audience. And you know as well as I do, in selling, it's the same thing. It's not about me.
Yep.
I've got to decrease so I can have you increase and make sure I'm focusing on your needs.
Yeah. Because it's never about you. It's always about them. Always about them. I was coaching some guy this morning and he was going off on a tangent that's going, look, it's nothing about you. Stop telling the product. Focus in on the other person. Ask them questions. Ask them about stuff. Like he was doing stationery and this, that, and the other. I said, look, It's not about you. It's always about them. And it is the empathetic salesperson, and it's the relationship builder. And you do need that process along the line to obviously understand them, but obviously connect with them. But then obviously you do need to sell the product, but hopefully they buy the product as opposed to you sell the product. It's the way I look at things.
Yeah, and that's the best relationship. I believe they buy the man or the woman before they buy the plan, but that's the second stage of the process, is to relate. Because if I have a bond or a relationship with you, you're going to open up. But if I don't, if I haven't established that relationship, you're going to play it close to the vest, and you elongate the sales cycle.
Absolutely. I totally concur. So, like, there's we know that COVID's happened and been and gone and all of that sort of stuff. Bit of a mad time. The challenges that I'm hearing all the time from salespeople, they can't connect with the buyer. They can't connect with the client just because they're not on the phone. But I also find technology, as much as it's wonderful and great and incredible, it's also a hindrance as well. I think it's a bit of a blocker because people also hide behind the technology and they sort of sneak up and down. They go, I can't get hold of anyone, but I'm under this CRM email thing and I just can't connect with anyone. Well, pick up the phone or do whatever you can do. Like, I know everyone's like working from home and all that, but I'm sure there's still ways and means to connect with people. Well, what is your take on this?
Totally agree. However, rather than being scattered in your approach, if you're more targeted in your approach, two things happen. Number one, you'll make more contacts if you're targeted. Number two, you'll build your confidence and your competency. So let me give you what I think is the right way to do this. Now, we've got enough books out there right now, Jason, on how to initiate calls, how to make cold calls, how to contact people. No matter where it is, whether it be email, whether it be phone calls, whether it be whatever, place their benefit ahead of your purpose. Now, what I mean by that, I'm making a call. Jason, Brian Flanagan, I do sales training. When can we talk? Well, there's no compelling reason for you to call me back or to stay on the phone. Yeah. But if I find a general benefit, Jason, we help sales leaders such as yourself do it better, faster, quicker, close more of the close ones. We help insurance agents, general agents retain more of their first-year agents. Well, those are all general benefits to these people I'm calling. And Jason, now the purpose of my call is to explore the benefits you could receive. Better success. Now, the success rate is not high in cold calling, but I'm going to have better success if I communicate a benefit to you before I demand you call me back, before I tell you my purpose is, here's your call to action. So place the benefit ahead of the purpose.
Totally and utterly concur. And it is that, what do I normally say? You have to really sort of get their attention very quickly because like you're disturbing their day, but you don't want to say I'm disturbing your day because obviously that's the wrong thing to say. It's bang, bang. How can you get their brains to actually go, oh, hang on a minute, this person's ready to listen for 30 seconds. After the 30 seconds, you invite yourself in to ask more questions, either to make an appointment or do something else that resonates with that person, the buyer or the influencer or whatever it might be, to get yourself onto that process.
Right. I agree. I was working with a group of salespeople yesterday doing a follow-up retention coaching, and they're in the restaurant business. And in the States, may be different from Ireland, but in the States, there's a shortage of manpower.
Same here.
Some restaurants are actually closing because they can't get a consistent workforce.
Yeah.
So one of the guys said, I think you should, along the lines of putting your benefit first, he said, you're right. But in our business, I'm going to empathize. Mr. Restaurant owner, I know you're faced with the challenge of manpower. One of the offers that we have is that, and then he goes into answering that that issue that person has. And that's a general benefit because he's not been in the account. He doesn't know the specific benefits, but he does know that the industry is dealing with this. And there's a shortage of workforce throughout that hospitality industry.
Yeah.
So that gets their interest and connect with them. And that buys another minute of airtime.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's what you are doing. I think Tom actually said something, and I'm trying to remember the quote. He said, "You're buying time in exchange for dollars." I think that buying time in exchange for, I think that was a Zig quote, and I can't remember precisely what it is. You probably know it inside out.
Well, there are a lot of them.
Yeah, well,
you're exchanging that value. One of the things I think that we fail to realize is that it's not the product that we sell, it's the end result. And what happens is that every day I go into the marketplace, what I sell never changes. My offerings never change. But every time I meet with somebody, that need changes.
Yeah.
When we talk about lead with need, not your product, you've got to find out what they want, what their pain is, so that perhaps you can come into your toolbox and pick out a solution.
Yeah. A good friend of mine, Ed Soho, lives in California, and like he's a phenomenal storyteller. But what he will do, he will sit down there and he'll do a metaphor story, and the guys will just be going, "Where are you going with this?" But he'd talk about a restaurant as digital marketing, but he would say, "Well, you have front of house, and then you'll have people behind the scene, then you have deliveries, then you have a." But he makes a comparison between that and digital transformation, but it resonates with people so they understand. Yeah. But you're doing it to make them understand rather than just going with the same stuff. If you can connect with them with a story or metaphor or something like that, do it something slightly different so it grabs their attention and they go, "Oh, wow, I never thought of it that point of view." And the conversation carries on.
You mentioned earlier there's all kind of changes, and there are. But one of the things that didn't change is what you just alluded to. In my day, in my generation of salespeople, called it third-party references. Now we call it storyboarding. It's the same wine in different bottles, old wine and new skins. But we've always had third-party references. Mr. Prospect, understand, I've got a client. When I first started selling, I worked along the Mississippi River in Louisiana, and we had petrochemical plants all down because the river allowed them to ship and transport and all those things, shipping. And it would be easy to say, we have a plant manager in Plaquemine, Louisiana that has the same problem you have in Narco. And let me tell you how he solved it. Well, it may not have been as sophisticated as storytelling as it is now, but we've done that all our lives. We just put a different label on it. Yeah. And I think what's happened, Jason, and I'm a little older than you, I think one of the things we've yeah. So when I started working, you were 14. So yeah, we're a little different here. But what happens? We've lost some of the salesmanship.
Yeah.
Now I was raised to be a peddler. Slap them on the back, buy them a cup of coffee, and talk about a local sports team.
Yeah.
And now that's the buyer's gotten more sophisticated. However, there were some things that old-timey salesperson had that I think we've lost. And some of it's a little bit of charisma. Yeah. Some of it's a little bit of boldness, of taking chances, of not being afraid to ask people for a decision. And I think we've lost a little bit of that. Zig's brother wrote a book, and one of my all-time favorite lines is the title of the book. And Jason, the title of the book was "Timid Salespeople Have Skinny Kids."
Oh, I like that. I'm writing this down.
And what's happened, I think that we're relying more on our technology than we did on our handshakes. I think that's a loss. That's a part of the lost art that we're missing.